Hello, my name is Mubin and I'm here with Roger here today.
Hello there.
And we wanted to talk about some recent developments that have happened in the Middle East.
Yes, we do, yeah. In our recent programmes, we've obviously been fixated with things like Andy Burnham running for the leadership of the Labour Party, domestic politics, all well and good. And of course, there's the interesting events happening at the moment in Clacton-on-Sea. But I think we've neglected to look at the international dimension to politics, and we've neglected talking about the Middle East, which is a shame, given that I'm actually a Middle Eastern specialist. I've done my first master's degree on Middle Eastern politics. I've been a journalist in the Middle East, and you've got quite a strong interest in the area, and a lot is happening. And I think the turning point this week that made you say we really must do a programme about the Palestinian Holocaust is that basically Hamas have basically completely capitulated to the board of peace, so called, which deals in war, which is a creation of Tony Blair and Donald Trump, and populated by various unsavoury dictatorships like Saudi Arabia and UAE, which we'll be looking at more closely later in the programme. And I think what you want to ask is how did the Palestinian resistance and how did Hamas get to this point? Because one thing I've noticed for quite a long time, going right back to when I was living in Ireland and going to Palestinian solidarity initiatives there, is even people who support the Palestinian resistance are under some kind of illusion that Hamas created the Palestinian resistance and that Hamas is the Palestinian resistance. Well, you know, when I was in the Middle East, the people I dealt with, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, certainly bore no resemblance to Hamas whatsoever. These were the people who initiated the Black September Rising in 1970, were involved in the Lebanese Revolution that was decapitated in 1975, 76. We might talk a bit about that. And they were actually the driving force of the Intifada in 1987, before it was hijacked by the PLO leadership and the Arab League, using Hamas to do their dirty work. Hamas has been a gun for hire ever since it broke from the Muslim Brotherhood in 1968. It has played a very nefarious role. And apart from Mehdi Hassan on ZTO, very few commentators have actually really sort of got to grips with that. He's done a really good job on that. He's actually exceptional. But most people are actually incredibly, even if their hearts are in the right place, they're supporting the Palestinian struggle. The internal mechanics of the Palestinian struggle remain a bit of a mystery to them. And I think it's time that we actually used our collective expertise to put the record straight, especially now that Hamas is a busted flush.
Yeah, and I think, you know, this recent essentially surrender by Hamas, political surrender, is just another example of how Hamas is consistently used as a tool by Israeli imperialism, by Western imperialism, to cut across the actual interests of the Palestinian liberation movement.
Always has done, right from its inception.
And, you know, Hamas have also not committed to disarming, right? So even this partial surrender is very clearly, like, in a certain sense, this is Hamas going back to what they're actually good at, which is being a military nuisance, essentially, and a useful boogeyman for the Israeli ruling class.
A military, there's no way that kind of hit and run war is ever going to overthrow Zionist occupation or defeat imperialism. And it's also counterproductive. And then, of course, they also still play into a repressive role of policing the Palestinian population. I mean, some of the people they've been going after are genuine collaborators, no doubt about it. Some of these gangsters who are getting money from the Zionists. But you can bet your life in there somewhere there's left-wingers and more critical people being nobbled, and we're just not hearing about it.
Yeah.
So, should we go back to the 1970s?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so in chronological order. Obviously, the Palestinian resistance began with the Nakba, the catastrophe of 1948, but it really took shape in the form that we came to understand it following the defeat of the Arab regimes in the June War of 1967. Now, the PLO already existed by then, but it was not a significant force until after 1967, and it was a very sort of broad sort of marquee. There were various factions and organisations in there, and probably the most significant ones at that time were the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, represented by George Habash and Layla Khaled, whose picture was on my wall all through my undergraduate years, and the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. They had slightly different politics, but they were both left secular groups. The idea that a Salafist or Islamist group would be the leadership of the Palestinian revolution was unthinkable in the 1970s and 80s, particularly in 1974, 75, when the left of the PLO, the PFLP, aligned with the Lebanese national movement under Kamal Jumblat, and was involved in what was in many ways the dress rehearsal for the Arab Spring, which was then decapitated by the Syrian invasion backed by the Arab League that led to the Tel al-Zatar massacre in northeast Beirut. Now, moving on to 10 years later, it's the left who initiate the Intifada, the first uprising from December 1987. And Arafat doesn't like this. He didn't like what happened in 1974 in Beirut. He doesn't like this. So he sort of goes running to the Arab League and says, look, I've got this idea for a two-nations peace plan. We want the Arab League to back this, and we will validate it at the 19th Palestine National Congress in 1987 in 1988, sorry, in Tunis, which is where the PLO were based at that time. But in order to do that, we've got to subordinate the Intifada to these diplomatic moves. So, given that he didn't have many troops on the ground in Gaza, he uses Hamas to actually liquidate the Palestinian left, and as a result of that, they become the dominant force in Gaza. So they actually basically become, because they've done Arafat's dirty work, they become, the dominant force in Gaza. And of course, once you get past the sort of like the support the first Iraq War, you get past the Oslo process, then they turn around and bite him in the arse. At which point the Israelis move in and start backing Hamas against the Palestine National Authority, who increasingly look like appeasers, because they actually they're talking to the Israelis while the Israelis are carrying on their illegal occupation and continuing their settlements in the West Bank. So they look like appeasers. Hamas projects itself as the people who are going to fight, the vanguard of the struggle, the people who are going to fight against the Zionists. But really, what can they do apart from chucking missiles at Israel, which is not going to overthrow Zionism, and it's not going to mobilise the Palestinian masses to seize state power? It's a game, a deadly game that actually, for which the Palestinian population has more recently foot the bill in terms of bloodshed, tens of thousands of Palestinians killed during the Zionist Holocaust. When the cycle of violence, the most recent cycle of violence, did not begin with the kidnappings on the border with Gaza. It began with the annexation of East Jerusalem, which demonstrated that the Zionists had every intention of annexing the West Bank, which is what they really want. It's one of the reasons that they want a war with Iran, is they can actually justify that by saying that the Palestinian resistance are Iranian proxies, blah, blah. We'll come to that later on. That's a slightly different issue. But they're inexorably bound together now. And basically, at the end of the day, one of the sort of commanders in Hamas have been pushing what became Operation Al-Aqsa Flood for a long time, and the Hamas leadership said, no, we're not going to do that, no, we're not going to do that. Eventually, there's been this annexation of East Jerusalem, there's been the mobs of Jewish fascists going through the streets of Israel saying, kill all Arabs. There's been the murder of American journalists at the Jenin refugee camp. There's all this bad stuff going on, and eventually Hamas desperately rolls the dice and carries out these hostage abductions on the border with Gaza during a music festival, basically. And this is absolutely what Benjamin Netanyahu needs. He's facing indictment. He's facing jail. He's just cracked. He's weaponised the Supreme Court in Israel. He's basically turning Israel into a fascist state. It's always been an apartheid state. Now it's becoming something much more nasty. And he knew, well, Mossad knew, Shin Bet knew, They all knew that something like this was going to happen. Egyptian intelligence told them something like this was going to happen. Ignored it. Too good an opportunity to miss. And bingo, as soon as that happens, the Israelis have invaded Gaza before, but not like this. Not like this. This is absolutely the end of any talk of... No one can see a two-nations solution coming out of this. This is absolute carnage. And Hamas basically let them do it. And that's an unpalatable truth that some of the Palestinian supporters of the Palestinians would not like to hear, but that is actually what's happened. Without a doubt.
Yeah, I just wanted to provide, because I did a little bit of research on the links between the Israeli state and Hamas from the 1970s. Beginning in the late 1970s, Tel Aviv provided financial aid to the Islamic movements as a counterbalance to the PLO. They legally recognized Sheikh Ahmed Yassin's organization, which allowed it to build an infrastructure of schools and mosques that eventually became the base for Hamas. And that this strategy has continued into the modern day as well. This isn't just like a historical thing about the shady origins of Hamas. In 2019, Netanyahu explicitly told Likud party members, anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. And authorized, billions of funds to be transferred from Qatar, where Hamas is based, to Palestine.
Yes, it's all come with the Gulf Arabs, but yes, we'll come to the Gulf Arabs in a minute. That's a particularly important one. But that actually fits in very closely with what I was talking about. Black September Rising in 1970. This was a rising in Jordan, where basically the PFLP were on the brink of establishing a Palestinian entity. Remember, the majority of the population of Jordan is actually Palestinian. And basically... the King Hussein, I think it was King Hussein, he asked the Israelis to come in and bomb the shit out of them, and they did. And it was that Palestinian left that the Israelis were frightened of. They weren't frightened of Arafat. They were frightened of the PFLP and the DFLP and people like them, especially when they joined forces with the Lebanese national movement in 1974, 5, 6, and with Kamal Jumblat. And this was a secular revolutionary movement. It was part of they saw themselves as part of a world revolution. They were not Islamists, they were not Salafists. You look at like posters from the 1980s when you see, female Fedayeen holding up their Kalashnikovs. They've not got headscarves or anything like that. This is basically what the Palestinian resistance was before 1987, when within the Intifada, Hamas really went for the Palestinian left. And yes, they were chucking people off bloody buildings. Yes, they were doing this stuff. They were killing left-wing Palestinians. They reduced the Intifada to an appendage of diplomacy on the part of the Gulf Arab states and the Arab League to achieve this so-called two-nations peace plan, which of course was never worth the paper it was written on, especially once Arafat moved his headquarters to Baghdad during the first Iraq War, when he had every excuse to say, look, this is not our struggle, we're not getting involved, we're staying neutral. He didn't dare do that because by that time Hamas was so powerful in Gaza that he would have lost all credibility and he was in a lose-lose situation. So yeah, it all fits in. It all fits in. Hamas are guns for hire. They've always been guns for hire. Who's going to hire them now? I couldn't tell you, but I wouldn't put it. If there was a mass movement tomorrow, they'd be the people repressing it. I remember in Ireland during the Arab Spring, shortly after the Arab Spring, I went to a meeting with, it was obvious Hamas people there. I mean, they didn't actually specify who they were, but they had the whiff of Hamas about them. And I said, well, what do you think of the Arab Spring? They said, well, it's a distraction from the Palestinian struggle. Absolutely not. The only way that the Middle East is going to be liberated is by a mass movement. The only way you're going to get a Palestinian state is part of a wider socialist settlement in the Middle East, which means overthrowing the autocracies as well. Without that, it's never going to happen. And the failure of Hamas's strategy recently exemplifies that point.
I do want to talk more, because I'm always looking for the silver lining, sort of, with these developments, right? Now, on the surface, this retreat by Hamas is nothing but terrible, right? It surrenders political control back to the imperialists. But Hamas has always served as a lid on the Palestinian liberation movement, right? To limit and control the Palestinian liberation movement. And it has had a mandate, a very weak mandate, but it did win an election once upon a time, right? The Board of Peace has absolutely no semblance of a mandate. It has absolutely no semblance of authentic leadership of the Palestinian people.
No, we can't.
And so, leaving aside for a second the fact that Gaza and the West Bank are becoming increasingly just uninhabitable, and so that the possibility of an authentic uprising is just limited by the objective factors on the ground at this point, which is a shame. But politically speaking, I can see an opportunity for a genuine political movement of Palestinians now.
It's happening more in the West Bank, actually, because, I mean, the PFLP are back in business. I actually was under the impression, quite frankly, I didn't derive any pleasure from it, but it appears to be that the Palestinian left had disappeared. Well, all of a sudden, we're hearing from them again, because Hamas has discredited itself. The Palestinian National Authority has discredited itself. And that does create a window up here. It'll be very different in Gaza itself at the moment. If you're living in tents, you're absolutely surrounded by rubble. It's really, really difficult to actually build any kind of movement to do anything. But the situation in the West Bank is different. And I think that there is going to be a resurgence of... I mean, I'm optimistic about this. I think there's going to be a resurgence of the Palestinian left. I really do. And you know me, I'm a bloody cynical old bloody... I'm always been pessimistic, but no, on this one, I think this is this is the issue. Yeah, very much.
But that also Palestinian liberation cannot be achieved in Palestine alone.
No.
Right, and this is people all across the Gulf states and further afield as well are recognizing this. That the only way for us to have a free Palestine is with a renewed Arab Spring.
Yes. 100%.
To overthrow all of these reactionary regimes that are making deals with Israel that are perfectly happy for US imperialism to be the dominant force in the region. If it means they can retain their power.
And that's been exemplified by the recent illegal imperialist war against Iran. Where you see the Gulf Arabs. I mean, we all know that Israel dragged America into it, but what is very often underestimated or understated in mainstream media is the important role played by the sort of Jared Kushner, Jeffrey Epstein connection to the UAE and the Saudi Arabians, because they bankrolled this. They're also they've always been important to American capitalism, probably beginning from the 1974 Saudi-US covenant, which is basically an agreement that brought to end the oil crisis of 1974. It allowed not only guaranteed that the Saudis would never cut off the oil ever again, but it also meant, for example, they would buy copious amounts of weapons and were allowed to invest in the American economy. There were contradictions in that occasionally. Like, for example, the BCCI, the Saudis tried to illegally acquire an American bank. That's why BCCI was shut down. Of course, one of the subtexts to why the authorities finally decided to go for Jeffrey Epstein was that he was helping the Saudis create a cryptocurrency called the Sharia based on their oil revenues, and the Americans weren't having that. That's why the first time he got arrested, he only got a slap on the wrist. The second time they actually went for him. In my view, that was sort of why he was killed, and so on and so forth. But in general, this has worked well for the Americans. It's bankrolled the rise of the tech oligarchs. It's bankrolled these reactionary, right-wing, hostile media takeovers, including Larry Ellison taking over Sky News in Britain and trying to take over ITV and ITN as well. And what basically happened, I think, there is the Gulf Arabs, who are part of this Board of Peace, were convinced by Kushner that if they backed this war against Iran, it will be over very quickly. Well, obviously it's not. We'll come into the reasons for that in a moment. But as a result of that, not only you then get the amplification, and then you get the conflict renewed in Lebanon. which is always a next rebound to the whole issue of Palestine, because the Zionists have always wanted to consolidate complete control of southern Lebanon, probably up as far as Sidon and certainly beyond Nabatea, which is a big chunk. I mean, it's not a very big country. That's a big chunk of the whole country. And so, basically they've ignited another conflict. They actually stopped attacking Iran for a while because the Gulf Arabs were getting jittery. But these people, these autocracies, who were the hangmen of the Arab Spring, have never been supporters of the Palestinian cause, and they never will be. The one thing they fear more than anything else is any democratic mass movement in the Middle East. And I saw this with my own eyes when I was a journalist during the first Iraq War. And George H.W. Bush incited insurrections in Basra and also in Kurdish Mosul. Okay, that's not part of the Arab world, but it all ties in. And the Gulf Arabs said, my God, we don't want democracy in Iraq. Crikey, that's the last thing we want. And so they actually abandoned these uprisings that they called for. And the consequences were horrendous, which is why in 2003, no one was going to look at America as a liberator. Well, you dropped us in the shit fucking back in 1991. Why should we trust you? Quite rightly. And but no, the renewed Arab Spring, and it'd be interesting to see what form that might take, is the key to the liberation of Palestine.
And I think we can talk about the Iran war as a potential ignition point for this, right?
Yeah.
Because America has gotten itself in a very sticky situation now.
It has.
Where it has been thrust into this war by Israel, by Netanyahu.
Yeah.
And there is basically no way out of it that is good for America. There is no possible, a retreat and basically a recognition of Iran's victory.
Yeah, which
is catastrophic for American imperialism.
Trump will never do that.
A ground invasion of Iran or an attempt to capture Karg Island will be the most unpopular imperialist war in living memory from the outset.
It will.
And will not end well for the possibility of actual regime change in Iran is higher with a ground invasion, but it's far from certain.
Well, it wouldn't end. It wouldn't be like it wouldn't be like Iraq, where they actually were kicking an open door.
Yeah.
And in fact, if the Americans had been bloody sensible and had not dismantled the state and had actually not sacked all the civil servants and the army and let people walk away from the army with their guns, things like Fallujah would not have happened. Because actually, Saddam Hussein wasn't popular. People were glad to see the back of it. The real crime in Iraq was the complete destruction of the Iraqi state that followed the invasion. And if they tried that stroke in Iran, and tried to rebuild, brought Reza Pavlova back and tried to build up his regime, got Mossad and the MEK involved in rebuilding the Savak. I think they've got plans for these kind of things. But it would take time, and during that time there would be a fierce resistance. It would make Vietnam look like a teddy bear's picnic. It really would. It would be nothing like Fallujah. It would be nothing like what happened in Basra. It would be far more vicious. And the Americans would lose this war. And that repercussion would be absolutely devastating for an already declining American empire. It would be its graveyard.
Absolutely. Anything to cap this off?
Yeah. Come on, Camp Binface.
Absolutely. We can talk about that a little bit, I think, maybe as a little capstone. But yeah, it is. We were talking about this earlier, that it is insane that Count Binface, as far as I can tell, is legitimately a better representative for the people of Clacton in Parliament than Nigel Farage is, because at least he's not trying to actively betray the British people at the expense of crypto billionaires or whatever.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. Yeah.
And I think the New Statesman actually came out with something in support of Count Binface, saying that every court needs a jester, kind of thing. But I mean, what an absolute disaster for Nigel Farage. I've spoken about it on the stream a little bit already.
Yeah. Of course, the thing is, he's only kicking the can down the road. I mean, at the end of the day, he's not going to evade parliamentary scrutiny. He can delay it for a month, and then it'll come back. And when basically, at the end of the day, if enough people, if 10% if he gets suspended for 10 days, or is it 7 days? Whatever. If he gets suspended for a period of time, and there is 10% of the electorate of Clacton say they want a by-election, there's a by-election. That's the rules. And that will come after he's really been dragged through the dirt. By the way, Jeff Cottrell is no relative of mine. Really important that we make this, but this business with Jeff and Fiona Cottrell, this business with Harborne over in bloody Thailand, the place where Bitcoin and crypto billionaires and Russian oligarchs and paedophiles all get together. This kind of dirty money that's coming, millions of pounds, undeclared, investigated by the National Crime Agency, for God's sake. This is scandalous. And the thing is, it's all going to come out. He cannot keep the lid on this stuff. And I know he got 46% of the vote in Clapton, but that was largely a protest vote against the establishment. He's not even had one. I mean, he's got his loyal faithful there, don't you worry? But he's never had one surgery with a constituent in all the time that he's been an MP. But he can swan off to America to be with his best mate Donald Trump, or dealing with these crypto bosses over in flipping like Harborne, who he has promised effectively a seat in government, to make Britain into a crypto hub. Oh, that's really going to help the population, while he's privatising the National Health Service and bringing in an American-style Doge, destroy all our public services. That's really going to help anyone, apart from millionaires like himself. The man of the people, don't make me laugh. Anti-establishment? How can you be anti-establishment when it's crypto billionaires and tech oligarchs who are running the bloody planet? The whole thing is nuts. It's a complete inversion. And yet the faithful, what's left of them, are in complete denial of all this, in exactly the same way as they are with Donald Trump. But he is running out of road. In fact, he's running out of pier, because there's a pier in Clacton-on-Sea. Purgatory with a pier.
It has been funny to watch all the Reform MPs also having to come out and defend this insane stunt as being some sort of legitimate democratic action. Sam
Bright is one of my heroes. I think he's a journalist on Byline Times, but I follow his blog on Substack. He's now talking about the Clacton cartel. Because the way that Trump goes around in these SUVs, like he's Donald Trump II, and he has all these heavy thugs going around with him, and he's now started threatening journalists to camera, which proves he's rattled.
Yeah.
And I don't mean threatening with legal action. It's like, I'll deal with you if you keep talking about my £5 million. He's really, really rattled. Game over, Nigel. Bye-bye and good riddance.
So on that note,
on that we really will
Binface for the win face.
Binface, yeah.
And free Palestine.
Free Palestine. And a Socialist United States of the Middle East. Absolutely. And Socialist United States of Europe. Yeah.
All right, we'll leave that there. Thank you. This has been an excellent discussion.
See you, folks. Take care. Bye.
Bye.